I haven't got anything, squirrel. I'm sorry. I haven't got anything. No food, no water. I'm sorry, darling. Now this is Arthur Peuchen or Peuchen. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And squirrel. Now Arthur was a Titanic survivor. He was born in Montreal, April 18th, 1859. And he moved to Toronto at the age of 15 years. He joined the Queen's Own Rifles at 17 years old. He was one of Toronto's wealthiest and most important people, and he travelled to England early March 1912 to visit his company's refineries, and after a month away he decided to return home. He booked a first class ticket for the Titanic, costing £30 and 10 shillings, and he managed to persuade his good friend Harry Markland Molson to sail home with him rather than wait a week for the other ship that was sailing. After boarding at Southampton, he occupied cabin C104, but he was far away from his friends, Harry, who was in C30, and Hugo Ross, who was ill with dysentery, on A deck in A10 at the time. On the night of April 14th, Arthur dined with the Allison family and Harry Molson in first class dining saloon, and around 9 he said goodnight to his friends and went to the first class smoking room for cognac, cigars and conversation. At 11:30 he decided it was time to turn in for the night, so he headed to his cabin. Once he was inside his stateroom, he started to undress when all of a sudden it felt as though a heavy wave had struck the ship. They were his words. He put on his overcoat and went up to the deck. As he started to go to the grand stairway, he met someone who told him the ship had hit an iceberg. He had a look on deck to see what was going on before going to see his friend Hugo, who was still ill in bed. He wanted to let him know what was happening. Supposedly, Ross stated, "Is that all? It would take more than an iceberg to get me out of bed," and went back to sleep. That was the last time Arthur saw his friend alive. He met up with his friend Charles Melville Hayes and went back onto the deck. As soon as they reached the deck, Arthur saw that the ship was listing. He remarked, "She should not do that. The water is perfectly calm and the boat has stopped." Approximately 10 minutes later, he entered the grand staircase and saw Thomas Beattie. Beattie told him the order is for lifeboats and boats. He asked Beattie to go and tell Hugo Ross. When Beattie said that he would, Arthur returned to his cabin to retrieve a tin box and put on more clothing. Once he was out on deck, he saw crew standing beside 4 lifeboats with the covers removed. The call went out for women and children to get into the lifeboats. It is said that passengers were reluctant to leave the warmth of the ship. Arthur assisted loading people onto the lifeboats. At one point, one of the lifeboats was a crew member short, so being a yachtsman, he offered to assistance. He was in Lifeboat 6. The RMS Carpathia rescued Lifeboat 6 at around 8 a.m. Peuchen was subjected to hostility by some of the women who had left their husbands behind. They could see he was fit and healthy and wondered why he had been in the lifeboat. He apparently had to obtain a certificate stating he'd been ordered into the lifeboat. The Carpathia arrived in New York on April 18th. Peuchen lived at 599 Jarvis Street in Toronto, and upon arriving home had received a telegram asking him to testify before the Senate inquiry in Washington. What is quite sad is the fact that he received criticism, that he had survived and not drowned. One newspaper stated he said he was a yachtsman to get himself off the ship. People would cross the street if they saw him coming to avoid him. Arthur was commander for the first year of World War I and was placed on the reserve list of officers in 1915. He lived in London between 1915 and 1918, and when he returned to Toronto, he was further criticised for surviving the Titanic and the war. His life after this was not too good. He suffered financial losses and moved away from Toronto, but returned to Toronto in 1929. He passed away at his home in Roxburgh Street on December 7th, 1929, aged 70 years. Apparently in 1987 his wallet was recovered from the Titanic debris.